live. Hey y'all, it's Becky here from the Beckisphere, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, I'm Becky, and you have stumbled upon the weekly climate book club. So, welcome. We have just begun a new book, so you're just in time, and it is called Climate Courage by Andreas Karelas. And so we are going to talk about the first two chapters today of the book. And if you hear noise in the background, if you hear canine noise in the background, it is my dog Charity, who might bark or snore or just make weird noises. And then if you're hearing human noises, then that is my mother. And she is here to help kind of create a dialogue going with me, so that I'm not just talking to myself. And if you are here, which I think someone's already here, so hi, then please contribute in the comment section, the discussion section, when we're talking about these conversations, because I would love to hear your all's perspective and your thought process behind the different topics that we bring up today. If you have not purchased your book yet, which I highly recommend you do, there will be a URL in the description below. But if you haven't, you are still definitely welcome to contribute to the conversation, and I very much encourage that. And anyways, now let's go ahead and start with chapter 1. Actually, do we want to start with the foreword? Let's start with the foreword. It's a good foreword. So feel free to introduce yourselves in the discussion section. I always love to see who all's here. So for the Climate Courage book, the foreword was written by Katherine Hayhoe, who is a climate scientist herself, and she is the founder and CEO of Atmos Research and the author of A Climate for Change. Oh, hi, Randy. Nice to see you. I hope you're doing well. Yeah, so I really love Katherine, and I was really excited to see that she did the foreword of it. And one of the things I found interesting about her foreword is she does talk a bit about how she's from Texas, and she is a Christian herself, and so she talks about how the evangelical community within the Christian community has not had the best rep when it comes to climate change activism, and so she herself kind of wants to change the narrative between religion and climate. So that's something that I found super interesting. Another part that I found really interesting is that she says we often assume that it's a lack of understanding rather than a lack of psychological distance and solution aversion that is at the root of the problem. And this is something that definitely reverberates throughout the whole book, because that is a misconception that a lot of people have about the topic of climate change, is that we are not moving on it because there's a lack of understanding, rather than it being just a lack of momentum, honestly, and a lack of personal connection to the issue. So that's one of the parts that she brings up in the foreword that we will continue to see in the book. Mom, what is one of your favorite parts of the foreword?
I like that she is positive, and she says that when we set out to look for bright spots, we will find them. And so she's very optimistic about, moving forward with new technology, electric airplanes, record-setting price drops in solar energy and battery storage, etc. So just a really positive message.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's another misconception about climate change, is that the technology is not already there to transition us to a clean energy economy, to a more sustainable way of living. And that's not true. We actually really do have almost all of the technology that we need to transition, basically all the technology. And the bits that we don't have, for example, more more efficient battery systems is a really big one. It's coming, and they're continuing to make more efficient batteries as we go. But that's basically the main thing that people point to stop us from moving us towards a clean energy transition is the battery service. And there's ways to get around that. There's better technology that's coming up with that. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't start moving the infrastructure in the right direction, right? So anyways, so that solutions and about how it's important solutions. And that's why this book is called Climate Courage, because we wanted to stress that it is important to focus on the solutions, focus on the bright spots and the good things about climate change, when that's not really what we hear right now. Is we talk a lot about the doom and gloom. So hi Rahul. Rahul says psychological distance and solution aversion. Yep, exactly. You quoted the part of the forward. That's one of my favorite quotes too. Yep. And so now we are going to go into the introduction one, which I guess counts as chapter. Does that count as chapter? No, that's not chapter 1. No, that's different. Sorry. We're going to go into chapter 1. And chapter 1 is called Reframing the Narrative. And they have a little quote thing in the beginning. The quote for this one is, we need courage, not hope, to face climate change. And it's by Dr. Kate Marvel. And I love that quote. We should put it on a shirt. Yeah. Honestly, good. Because it's kind of like the thoughts and prayers sort of tweet versus an actual action, and I think that definitely is where we're at, where we're mostly focusing on just like being hopeful instead of actually going out and making a difference. So yeah. All right. So reframing the narrative talks a lot. Rahul says, love these quotes at the beginning of the chapter. Me too. There was a lot of really good quotes. I felt encouraged just by the quotes, because it means that a lot of other people are in the same headspace. Yeah. So for reframing the narrative, he quotes a lot the past book that we already read, which is cool. We'll pretend like that's on purpose. So for those of you who haven't been a part of this channel for as long, the previous book in this book club, which you can go back and look at some of the previous Climate Book Club videos, was Don't Even Think About It by George Marshall. And that talks a lot about how the psychology of how we frame climate change and how we talk about climate change and think about climate change has made it difficult for us to act on it, but also that it's not as psychologically problematic as we think it is. It depends on how you frame the narrative. Mm-hmm. If you frame it that it's doom and gloom, that it's the consumer's fault, that it's not, that the technology isn't there yet, that we're all going to die, I don't want to get up from my couch with that mentality either.
Watch another
Netflix movie. I hear Big Mouth's new season is out. PSA. So that's basically what is talking about, how from doom and gloom to actually we're doing great things. We're already heading in the right direction. We just need to move faster, and we need to have more people on board. So yes. So one of the parts that I highlighted in this section is that the Pope and other religious leaders are calling for climate action based on spiritual teachings. The Department of Defense lists climate change as a top security threat, and the clean energy industry boasts the fastest job growth the fastest growing job sector in American economy. And those things are all true. So from a religious aspect, from an economic aspect, and from a national security aspect, we're being compelled by leaders to move us in the direction of environmental and sustainability. And also the clean energy industry is not only creating way more jobs than the fossil fuel industry, but now solar panels are cheaper than forms of fossil fuel. So it really shows that whether or not you're focusing on the markets or you're focusing on politics and political leadership, both of them are heading in the direction of clean energy and sustainable living. So that's very cool. And oh yeah, I want to read this part too. So this is on chapter 6, if you are reading along. Chapter 6 and
Chapter 6?
Sorry, not chapter, page 6. Goodness. Page 6. And it is called The Unprecedented Opportunity. And in this part, it says, the personal and social benefits of tackling climate change are manifest in many different facets of life. If we use clean energy and energy-efficient technologies at home and in our workspaces, eat more plant-based foods, ride our bikes instead of driving, spend more time in nature and with family and friends instead of shopping or watching TV, participate in a sharing economy instead of accumulating more things, and live more simple, uncluttered lives, we not only stop the planet from warming, but we will also live happier, healthier, and more fulfilled lives in communities that are more resilient and more prosperous, communities with more job opportunities and more opportunities for meaningful connection. And yeah, that it just exemplifies that climate change is so intertwined in a lot of the other social, economic, health issues that we are facing today. There is a lot of parallels between this issue and other issues that other people are tackling. And so that's why it's increasingly important that we tackle this issue in a way that addresses other issues, and that we tackle other issues in a way that addresses the environment. So, yeah. Another part that I liked was it talks, Rahul says sharing economy. Yes, exactly. So, for example, this is from Threads Up. Unfortunately, there's no male section, or there's like a boy section, but there's not an adult man section in Threads Up. I don't know why. Maybe because guys just don't use as many clothes, or when they do, it just like...
For those who don't know what Threads Up is.
Oh, for those of you who don't know what Threads Up is, it is the largest online thrift store. And they have a lot of really good deals and stuff. Like, it's good for the pocketbook, and also it decreases your consumer impact through like fast fashion and stuff. You spelled it wrong, Rahul. Threads Up doesn't have an A, but I see your point. Yes, boo Threads. You got to push on it then. Opportunity. Anyways, Rahul says my bad. Fine. You're fine. It's fine. So another part of chapter 1 that talks about reframing the narrative talks about it in the perspective of a vision of a not too distant future. So he kind of, in this part, he kind of gives sort of a summary of what the possible future could look like if we moved in a good direction. And I want to read to you guys a little bit of that, because I don't know, it's utopian-ish, but it's also realistic at the same time. So I liked that section. So again, this is on page 6, and we're going to go on to page 7. And it says, imagine you're driving home from work. You pull into a garage and plug a charger into your electric vehicle. The power is coming from the battery bank on the wall that's been charging all day from solar panels on your roof that are effortlessly turning sunshine into electricity. You walk into your house, which is perfectly warm to the temperature you like, through a combination of passive solar design that keeps your home cool in the summer and warm in the winter. Geothermal floor heating that brings heat from the ground into your floors, and electric heat pump that's also powered by solar panels on your roof. Your extremely efficient dishwasher and washing machine know when to power up based on when electric rates are cheapest. When they're done, they pipe the dirty water into your water-efficient toilets. When you and your family want to adjust the smart appliances and indoor climate preferences, you can manage it all on your smartphone. And he keeps going, talking about your day and stuff. Now, I understand that to some people, this seems like very privileged living. I do want to mention that, because not everybody's going to be able to afford a wall to charge your car. Not everyone can afford cars. So to some extent, it seems like a very far off, privileged sort of way. But I mean, think about how many people have smartphones nowadays, how quickly that technology was adopted, even people with lower economic privilege have gotten the newest iPhone and stuff like that. Like, there's also prioritization, it seems, towards getting the next best thing. And while that, we'll see if that transfers more to infrastructure, I think that in the long run, these investments will save people money and save, obviously, like the environment and stuff like that. So this is an example of really what long-term thinking through infrastructure development can look like.
So I'll say that, cheating a little bit, I read ahead, and he's going to talk about a small town in Texas where it's run by the mayor's like an accountant, and solar energy was the cheapest and the best. And so they took the whole town 100% solar because it actually was more economical.
As it would be in Texas, where they have sun. But yeah, no, exactly. So
you're correct. Infrastructure definitely better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so here living in California, we have solar panels on our roof too. And so that allows us to definitely decrease our own carbon footprint in that way and
save money,
save a ton of money. That's where I think a lot of things come in parallel with environment and economics, is that it's cheaper, and it's continuously becoming cheaper because renewable energy is not something that just like, that you have to continue putting more effort into. It's something that you do, you're good, you're done. You need repairs, obviously. But Rahul says Elon Musk just moved there too. Oh yeah, he just moved to Texas.
Wow.
He said the Silicon Valley has too much power and decided to move to Texas.
Oh my
At least that was his reasoning. I don't know if that's actually the reason why he moved there, but yeah, he just moved to Texas. So that's interesting. Honestly, sure, make more Silicon Valleys. I don't care. Sounds good to me. All right, so let me go ahead and move on. So he also talks about jobs and how jobs will continue to grow through beefing up the infrastructure, through changing to renewable energy, and also just Randy says long-term thinking is important, but without incremental wins, the economically disadvantaged just won't trust it. While the energy is cheaper, the buy-in is way out of reach of most. Definitely. I completely agree. And I think that's where government subsidies really do come into play, to make it so that the market can offer it in a cheaper way to more people than if it was just like left on the market timeline. But that's my personal opinion. Yeah, obviously there's a lot of disagreement on how much we should let the market run versus regulating it. And I think that's a really interesting conversation to have. And so if you want to keep talking about this conversation in the description, let me know what you guys think about that. I would be really interested. It is a really complicated discussion topic, and I definitely do want to do video.
There's a lot of subsidies that go towards the oil and gas companies already. So
yeah,
it's already not really free market.
Absolutely. Exactly. That's a good point, Mom, is that we were like people that talk about just letting the free markets run negate to mention the point that the free market isn't free to begin with. Like, we already do have advantages towards certain companies and towards certain industries. Than we would if we actually were full free markets. So yeah, it's kind of it's a very complicated situation for sure. Maybe I need Ryan to just like have a conversation with me about it, because my twin brother, he just graduated for economics, and so that might be an interesting thing for him. I don't know if he would want to be involved in that conversation though, but I think would be interesting. Anyways, so another part that he talks about in chapter 1, we're still just in chapter 1, which really shows how much information this book has. So again, highly recommend. But anyways, and also I think this is most people that's been in my group chat. There's 5 people.
Yay!
And I think there was 6 at a moment, but yay! So thank you everybody that's here. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you find this as interesting as we do. We being my mom and I. If you didn't hear who the voice is, it's an amazing book. It's really good, and again, it was in 2020 or 2020. Rahul says it's also a smooth read. Told you, dude. It is. Yes. It is a smooth read. Like honestly, it's for such complicated topics. He just breaks it down super easily. It's like having a discussion with your friend, but it's written down and it's grammatically correct. It's great. Okay, so another part that he talks about in chapter 1 is that and a thing that is also very common throughout this book is that he focuses on empowering citizens and communities to be change makers. He really focuses on the community effort. And I really like that because I don't know if any of you guys have ever watched, like the little town meetings that happen like during. I always thought that was so cool. I was like, why don't we have more town meetings where people are involved? I mean, obviously with COVID time, it could be virtual, but I feel like we've gotten to the point where a lot of people really are disconnected to their local government and to just like their neighbors and stuff. We don't talk to each other as much anymore, and it shows. So I think that is a very important aspect of small town life community that really needs to be brought back, because it makes a difference and it makes you more connected to what is happening in your community and how you can personally impact your community. So yeah, it's really, really important. And one of the things that he talks about, which from a journalism perspective is very interesting to me, is that he says that one of his criticisms is that so the big companies see us as consumers, politicians see us as voters, and the media sees us as viewers. And that is a very big problem, is that we see people as viewers as, potential income, right? Instead of people themselves and people who have their own opinions and their own information that they want to share. And I think that's something that the journalism industry especially needs to figure out in their business model, how we can be profitable and yet also responsible with our storytelling and community storytelling. So very, very interesting that he brought that up, because I definitely agree that there is a connection between the journalism industry is acting right now and environmental movements are acting. There's definitely parallels. So yes. And another thing that he said that I thought was really interesting is he said, to solve climate change, we're going to have to remake the world and reimagine how it works by running countless new experiments. I love the way he said that. Yeah, absolutely. Love the way he said that, because, okay, let me just keep reading. We have an opportunity to redesign everything from how we eat to how we get around to how we power our society to how we plan our cities to how we build our buildings to how we interact with others to how we are making a living. This is going to require everyone to be creative doers, makers, and thinkers. And I think this is so in line. Okay, so it sucks that we haven't tackled climate change when we have. But now that we have the digital era where someone like me can just go onto YouTube and, I mean, obviously my channel's not big enough to like make money or anything, but like, people can make their money online. People can actually use their creativity and express it to the world, right? So it's a really neat opportunity to be alive right now with technological advances. And I think the climate movement really goes very strongly into that, because we are able to focus on our creativity. Rahul says, yes. Yeah, you're a creative dude, and so are you, Randy. I know you are too. And so it's really cool that we are able to make a job for ourselves to some extent. I mean, obviously that's not true for everybody. It really depends, but a lot of people are able to determine their own career paths. and explore different things and try different things. And that all has to do with having a conversation about it, which is what I want this channel to be about, is just talking about what are the ideas out there, what are the pros and cons of each of them, and if and how they should be implemented. Yeah. So that's still just in chapter 1. But now we are finally to chapter 2. Is there anything else that any of you or that mom that you would like to say about chapter 1?
I think you covered it.
Boom. If any of you have anything else to say about chapter 1, please let me know, or any of the topics that we've covered this far. But until I see things on the discussion, I am going to then move on to chapter 2, which is called The Psychology of Climate Change. Boom. And this also is very heavy on the 2012 book that we read. Don't even think about it, because that really did focus on like how our brains are wired to avoid climate change. That was the subhead. I just said the subhead. Anyways, so first with the inspirational quote. It's a long journey from the head to the heart, and an even longer journey from the heart to the hands. By Bartholomew the First.
Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople.
Yep, I can't read these things, but yes, there you go. Okay, so some of the main parts that I found interesting. For one thing, I've actually read the Uninhabitable Earth that he brought up in this, and it is very depressing. Something that's really funny is, so I took a class in college called Learning to Live in the Age of the Anthropocene. Big mouthful. But we read so many books with so many depressing titles. I remember looking at the book list, and it was like The Uninhabitable Earth, After We All Died. Like those are seriously some titles, and I was just like, oh God. So it's really interesting to see also how, that was what, 2 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
How the titles talking about climate change have changed.
Mm-hmm.
We have now moved on from depressing the shit out of everyone to talking about the solutions, right?
Climate of hope.
Climate of hope.
On page
Climate
13.
courage. Yes, exactly. On page 13. Yes. Climate of hope. Drawdown, which I guess is kind of a neutral name, honestly. And being the change. Live well and spark a climate revolution. That's the only one I hadn't heard. I'd heard of Drawdown, and I've heard of Climate of Hope. I don't think I've read Climate of Hope, but I have read Drawdown. Highly recommend. It's a comprehensive guide to, I think, top 160 solutions to the climate, which is amazing. You want to go get it?
No, I gave you Climate of Hope.
It's back over there.
No, there it is.
What?
It's the Bloomberg Pope book.
Oh yeah, you gave it to me. That's one of the books I haven't read. Barking I mentioned might happen. Okay. As talked about in the previous book that we read for this climate book club, our brains on climate change, there's two main aspects to the brain, right? There's the emotional aspect, and there's the thinky aspect. I can't think of the word right now for what that's called. And one of the best ways to explain it is the elephant and the rider, which is the elephant is the emotional part of the brain that is larger, and the rider, who does technically have reins and has control over the elephant to some extent, tries to move the elephant in certain ways. And the rider is the logical side of the brain. That's the word I was looking for. Yes. Logical. So even though the rider might be able to control the elephant to some extent, if the elephant gets spooked, it's just going. Like, doesn't matter if the rider's there or not, right? And that's really how the emotional brain versus the logical brain works, right? You have the logical brain that tries to rein in the emotional brain and tell it what direction it should go and tell it what's the logical thing to feel, right? But if you are triggered by something, boom, your emotional brain goes off. It does not matter about logic, right? And we've all seen that. We've all done that. We have all regretted that, but but that's the way it is, because the logical brain is a more recent development biologically, and so it just hasn't been around for as long, and the emotional brain just it has a lot more control. So yeah, so that's basically what he's talking about in the first part of this, actually for most of it. But what he does in this chapter is he goes through a certain part of the Don't Even Think About It book where George Marshall talks to this human psychologist about climate change and why it's so hard for humans to understand it. And in this chapter, Andreas Karelas breaks down the points of why we cannot understand climate change, and now talks about it from a 2020 perspective. So that's in 2012.
2014.
2014? Is it 2014? Oh, in 2014, when the Don't Even Think About It book was made, it was a lot easier to say that many people thought that it was far off an issue of climate change, that so it wasn't salient to people. They don't feel it.
Yeah.
2020, different story. However, these negative impacts are far more salient today than they were even last year, and certainly the year before that. Because we have wildfires, we have floods, we have hurricanes, we have droughts. So they're definitely showing up more. And we have climate refugees that are now having to move location, or hurricanes or flooding or drought that's made it impossible to live where maybe their family has lived there for generations. That's something that especially Indigenous people are having to face right now, because they have really grown up respecting and living with the land and with the resources given. And now, due to what is sometimes called slow violence, the land is changing from underneath them, and they're not allowed to move because it's reservations. And so they are just stuck having to figure this out, which is problematic.
Yeah, a lot of people in Central America too.
Yeah,
are trying to move north.
Right, to be blocked by our immigration.
Yeah,
but that's a different topic. But yeah, so there is going to be a lot more immigration to happen in the future because of climate change. And yeah, so that is one part that he discusses. He also talks about standard of living on page 16. And he talks about how solving climate change will reduce our costs and increase the standard of living, which is something that we have talked about already. And that we need to shift the narrative from highlighting we need to shift the narrative to highlighting the benefits of action instead of the threat of inaction. And so that is a very big part that he talks about in the book.
Read that paragraph, the second paragraph on page 16.
Mitigating climate change doesn't have to be punitive. Rather, it will save us money, improve our health, increase our happiness, build stronger bonds in our communities, create jobs, and dramatically elevate our well-being. We need to shift the narrative to highlight the benefits of action instead of the threats of inaction.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's a hopeful message.
It is a hopeful message. And sorry. So another part that he talks about, I think I'm going to try to skip around a little bit because I've been talking a long time. Are you guys still awake? Are you still there? Send me a little pulse of life. Yeah, so he talks about how things are less uncertain and how we need to shift our collective will of our nation in order to make this happen. But in addition to that, not everybody needs to come along. We need just as many as we can. Rahul? Good. Rahul's alive. I'm not convinced Randy is, but it's okay. And the other people who are here, hi. So, yeah. So basically, we are not in the same place that we were just 6 years ago. That's really a big takeaway. And that through reframing the narrative, from talking about all the bad things that happen. Randy says, alive, just cooking. Awesome, dude. Thank you. If we move from focusing on the consequences of an action and move it towards talking about the solutions and stuff, then that's where we're going to really continue the momentum and speed up the momentum.
So bottom page 20 has kind of a summary of the rest of the chapter, the big main points there.
Yes. Thank you. Perfect. Okay. So, so the end of chapter 2 is really where I highlighted like a ton of stuff. So one of the things connect to the emotional brain first is one of the topics, or is one of the points that he makes of how to talk about climate change better. Is you do have to focus on the emotional aspect of the topic. You need to stay positive when talking about it. Focus on your message, on success stories, empower. So be solutions oriented, and focus on community, because it's a combination of, it reminds people that they're not alone because they have a community there. And when you act as a community, you're stronger. So those are some important takeaways for when talking about climate change to people: is connect emotionally, stay positive, focus on solutions, and focus on the community aspect of it. And sorry, I need to take a breath. On the part that says stay positive, I want to read a section that I thought was a really good analogy. So let me go ahead and just read that. So this is on page 22, and he says, picture the following scenario. You're a coach of a high school basketball team. It's the fourth quarter. There's only 5 minutes left of the game. You're down by 10 points, and the other team has been dominating all game. You call timeout. What should you say to your players? Nate says, just call them racist. Works every time. What? Okay. I have no context. I'm missing the context on that one. Sorry. But thanks for joining. Hi, Nate. So for staying positive. So picture that you are a basketball coach. You bring the team over. You're in the middle of a game in which your team is losing. If you follow the tone of many climate messages, you'd probably say something like, the data shows that if we continue playing this way, we're going to lose by a lot. In fact, the chances of us turning this around are slim to none. This is going to be a devastating loss for our team and this community. My prediction is that your friends will stop liking you and you will be very unpopular. If we project 20 years into the future, I see you all living miserable lives as a result of losing this game. I love that so much because it's so true. Or you could say something like, yeah, I know we're down, but we've been in tough spots like this before. These next 5 minutes are about heart. I know how much this team cares. I know we've got what it takes to rise to the challenge and win this game. Take it one play at a time and keep your eyes on the prize. We've got this. That seems a lot better of a messaging to me.
Way more motivating.
Way more motivating. And that's honestly probably much more similar to what coaches actually say to their teams. So why don't we say that to people for climate change? We got this. Sorry if that was loud to anyone wearing headphones. So I really like that. And he says, if you were a player, which of these messages would you rather hear? Which would inspire you to play better and thus give a better chance of winning? Daniel Goleman describes this phenomenon of positive versus negative framing as relates to climate messaging. He says, our impact on the planet is inherently guilt-inducing and depressing. Focusing on what's wrong with what we do activates circuitry for distressing emotions. Emotions, remember, guide our attention, and attention glides away from the unpleasant. So yeah, it's really important to focus on the positives because otherwise people are just going to sink into their couches. And another part that I thought was interesting is, again, from a journalism perspective, is very interesting. How the narrative of climate change still is very doom and gloom for a lot of news organizations in particular. And while it's hard because the newsworthy stuff, frankly, usually is depressing. Usually there's more tipping points that we hit. Usually there's, some devastating stuff that we find out, right? And so it can be really easy to just get those clickbaity headlines and cover the depressing stuff. But he says on page 23, while I'm glad that major media outlets are speaking more plainly about the issue, what effect is their coverage having? Seeing a terrifying headline about climate change for the 13th time isn't going to suddenly change your mind about the issue. You're already used to turning out. And that's very true. And it's true for many people. We just kind of glaze over and we just keep doing what we're doing. And it doesn't give us any point of reflection because we've heard it. We probably feel that a lot with our current situation now too. I know a lot of people, me included, we just stopped listening to the news for a little while because it was just too depressing. So that happens with climate change too. Let's see. So.
But that's why this book is so good too.
Yeah, that's why this book is so good.
It has a ton of positive examples in it. Real life situations, a ton.
Exactly. It has, and this is just, we're just talking about the beginning of this book. He's setting up the framework of where we are now to then talk about what we need to do, and so, yeah. So another part that I thought was interesting is in the section of empower, which is talking about solutions. And this is on page 25. And he says, one of the biggest dangers we face is debating the perfect plan to solve climate change until we're blue in the face. And in the meantime, we're not making any progress. And that is another very big misconception of climate change, is that it's either all or nothing. You either have to be perfect or you shouldn't do anything at all. And that's just not true. And it's not productive. And another thing that he says is that while it might seem advantageous to focus on the biggest problems first, it might just be more uplifting to just do small, easy things first. And there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we really can tackle that will be a lot easier than some of the bigger ones. Not to say the bigger ones shouldn't be done, because they definitely need to get done. But it doesn't mean that we should do nothing until we have the perfect plan to figure everything out at once, right? So I really liked how he said that. Take a breath, Becky. Okay. And then he talks about focusing on community, and this is is it the last section of the chapter? I think it's the last.
Yeah.
Yes. Last section of the chapter. So he says on page 27 that community ties play an important role in any social movement, but when it comes to climate change, the value is even more pronounced. Climate change is a collective problem caused by collective behavior. And therefore, the only way we can solve climate change is by activating groups of people to assign value to sustainability as part of their community identity. And as you explained in your little read ahead moment of talking about that little town in Texas, that's basically what they did, right? They made sustainability part of their identity. And that's how they were able to move towards a more sustainable way of doing things. And that's true with certain cultures as well, like certain religious groups that value nature more highly as God's creation, focusing more on for example, Indigenous people as well, how they definitely, their identity is very heavily based in nature. And I think that that is something that a lot of people lack. And it's possible to do even if you aren't surrounded by trees, even if you don't see nature right outside your door. That doesn't mean that you can't value it. I mean, technically, the air is nature too, The sky and the stars are nature, the clouds nature, the weather's nature, So it makes sense that we would value it because it is such an important aspect of our lives. And as much as we sometimes seem like we want to, we shouldn't pretend like it's not there. Anyways, okay, so so then he compares focusing on community as the same process that makes AA, an Alcoholic Anonymous, so effective. It's because the power of a group to teach individuals how to believe happens whenever people come together to help one another change. Belief is easier when it occurs within a community. And that makes a lot of sense because you're constantly getting positive reinforcement that this is the right thing to think or believe. And that makes it a lot easier. You're no longer going against the current. You're no longer going against the group. You're now just working together and going together. And that is a much easier way to handle it. And I think that that is something that is definitely, I'm seeing a lot more. I definitely used to feel a lot more alone about this issue, which is one of the reasons why I avoided it for so long. Than I do now. I think it's a lot easier. There's a lot more people to come along with. There's a whole developing climate YouTube community. I mean, there's like 10 of us. So it's coming. Like I'm finding more and more of them. I haven't even told you about some of them more. So another part that he talks about within the community aspect is a movement starts because a social habit of friendship and strong ties between close acquaintances. It grows because of the habits of a community and the weak ties that hold neighborhoods and clans together. And it endures because the movement's leaders give participants new habits that create a fresh sense of identity and a feeling of ownership. The reason new habits continue to spread is because participants feel empowered. They feel a sense of ownership of the movement. And that's definitely true with a lot of other movements that have succeeded, right? The Black Lives Matter movement, I think, is a good example. A lot of people feel definitely that that is part of their identity and it is part of their value system, and it is that they have ownership, they have personal connection and ownership, to that movement. And that's the same way that the climate change movement needs to be. And it shouldn't just be for hippies or scientists. At our deepest level, this is on page 29. We're almost done, kids. Thank you. At the deepest level, we are motivated by what we believe to be true and what we ascribe to our identity. So again, if we make it part of our identity, then we will continue to act on it. I'm basically just saying the things that I highlighted at this point. Is there anything that I haven't said that you highlighted, Mom?
No, I think this is good.
Okay.
I will mention one other thing. He mentioned someplace in this chapter about how we lean on people that we trust. And so that's going to be a theme throughout the book too, is that we take our cues about how to behave on climate change from the people that we trust.
Yes.
And so being able to become a person that is trusted and has similar values as other people and listens to them is really super important. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why the fact that it's become a partisan issue and we feel like we can't talk about it with family and friends specifically is so damaging to the climate movement, because those are the people that you trust, right? And so to feel like you can't bring it up in conversation with people you trust makes it really hard to form a movement. Another part that I thought was interesting is, as humans, we have a knee-jerk reaction to someone telling us what to do or think. And if there's a hint of self-righteousness in the message, it's even more affront. And that is a very big issue with basically anyone who's trying to, be in charge of or like to contribute to a movement and take some sort of leadership role on. I know personally for me as a new YouTuber, I try really hard to not come off as self-righteous or act like I know better than others, right? I don't. I'm reading. Nate says it hasn't helped that people can convolate. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that word. Convolate climate action with the doomed. Yeah. With the doomer world is ending in 12 years crowd. Yeah. So... yeah, it's hard because I think it also has to do with misunderstandings or mistranslation between the scientific community and the general public. Because there are cases in which there are tipping points where there are feedback loops that become worse, and that's where the runaway climate change sort of mentality comes from. But at the same time, it's not a whole cataclysm. It's not a cliff that completely drops off and then you're done, right? There are different steps, different points in which things get worse. And I think, unfortunately, it got misconstrued that one of the earlier tipping points that we found, which I think was probably some of the major glaciers melting and beginning to melt, that would be just the end of it. And so that unfortunately prevailed and is prevailing still in a lot of people's public mind. Is they're like, well, you guys said that we're going to be dead like 12 years ago. Why didn't that happen? So it's really unfortunate that has been the case. And I think that now that scientists saw that is the playback, we're kind of like backing up from talking about the tipping points as much, because it is just very it's very numbing to a lot of people to just think that we're just done.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah, it's overwhelming. Yeah. Randy says science needs better storytelling. Absolutely. Unfortunately, it's a very poor trend that a lot of science people really do not know how to do storytelling, which is why me as a science writer, I talk with people. And it's interesting because I think one of the reasons why it's so difficult for scientists to tell a story is they get so caught up in the details, especially when they're the ones that are researching it. Yeah, as Rahul says, it's too technical. Killier. Nate, I don't know what you're saying, dude. Killier? Kill the cows? Okay, Nate. But yeah, so it's basically kill the cows. Yeah, exactly. Well, now I lost my train of thought. Message retracted. Okay, Nate. I didn't know you could retract messages on this. Good to know. But yeah, no, it definitely, a lot of scientists, they get caught up in the detail of things, and because of that, sometimes it becomes really difficult for them to understand the big picture or understand what other people need as the main takeaway.
And they don't connect to the emotional brain.
Because frankly, a lot of scientists have taught to stay away as far as you can from emotion, because you don't want emotion to come into your experimentation, because then that could hurt, the biases could hurt your experiment. So we have been taught, we being me, I guess, as well, because I got a bachelor's in environmental science, almost in marine biology. It's close. With a minor in biology. But yeah, so it's very ingrained in us from the first lab class that we need to keep our opinions out of it. When we're writing up manuals, we literally get we get points down if we have any first person sentences. It's that extreme. We are taking ourselves out of it that much. And because of that, I feel like people in the science community, unfortunately, their mentality just gets stuck in that way. And it's really hard to change that when you've been learning it for such a long time. And I'm honestly not sure what the solution is for that, because to some extent, obviously, there's a reason why we kept our emotion away from scientific discovery and stuff like that. I think maybe there just needs to be more funding for science communicators. And so the last thing that I am going to say is on page 30, I like to quote, "We've gotten too busy to search for common ground and share values that could open up productive dialogue." And I think that is very true. We are caught in the weeds of the daily life, and we no longer sit down and have a conversation. The sentence before that, for a little more context, is, "In a world in which information is being thrown at us in a million miles a minute, most of us don't have time to talk with our friends to find out what's behind their beliefs, let alone people who aren't friends, but mere fellow Americans who live in a different part of the country and have a different lifestyle and different worldview. We've gotten too busy to search for common ground and shared values that open up productive conversation. Instead, we ignore it, or we post an angry rant, only further reinforcing the perception of arrogance or self-righteousness. This is partially why we've become more siloed than ever. And as long as this dynamic remains, it will be tough to motivate our collective elephant, because we won't know how to speak to each other's deep-seated beliefs, values, and emotion and find common ground. And Nate says, people are also concerned hearing about new multi-trillion-dollar climate bills when we are in a struggling economy and can't afford other tax increases and or hyperinflation. My response to that is, then why are we so keen at giving money immediately to the military or to, oil and gas companies, or wars, or giving money to the rich? Like, it's convenient when for some things and suddenly inconvenient for other things. So I understand our country's in debt. We're going to become more in debt as we figure this climate change thing out. It's just something that we have to accept. Unfortunately, we're going to be more in debt by this issue, and it's an important enough issue that we honestly need to. Randy says, it's possible the disruption we're experiencing may provide possibilities to bridge these things. Disruption provides opportunity. Absolutely.
So what you've learned about our decrease in carbon is a good way to close.
Yes. So, okay.
Talk
Nate,
about disruption.
Yes. So let me read the comment from Nate, and then I'll say that. So Nate says, well, politicians aren't cutting any of those things. So the issue is people know this is one more thing to be tacked on as we pay for. True. But if we stop giving money to the rich and tax the rich instead, and then we'll have more money. But that's just my opinion. What I'm going to say is that it has been reported that global carbon emissions have dropped by 7% this year due to the pandemic. Now, I am very hesitantly optimistic about that, because it sounds great from the front, but knowing, Randy's like, tax the rich. Yes. I love that we have different opinions and stuff in just this dialogue alone. It's amazing. You guys are great. I think it's really encouraging that emissions have dropped 7%. That's huge.
It shows there can be a big change.
It shows that there can be a big change, aka people just stay home. No. But I'm hesitantly optimistic about it, because if we go back to business as usual when the economy goes back to where it was before, then we are definitely going to we're going to make up for that lost time. So the important thing is, and one of the reasons why it is so essential that we're covering this climate change issue as we're also getting out of the pandemic, is that we need to make sure that we are not going back to business as usual, because business as usual doesn't work. Nate says, if you want that, then why elect Republican and Democrat politicians who create tax loopholes? Biden and Clinton were at the forefront of tax loopholes. Okay, Nate, I appreciate your dialogue on this, and I do want to keep going, but it is almost an hour long for this live chat, and I do want to finish it up. So come at me earlier with these conversation points, and I'll come at you back. But I don't want to get into politics completely right now, specifically that stuff, because we're continuing to make it a partisan issue with climate change. And
actually, this book is all about communities at a local level making change, because the federal government has a hard time making change.
Yes, the federal government moves very slow, because democracy moves very slow. So, Randy says, whataboutism doesn't solve things.
Okay.
And I'm going to leave it with that. Thank you all so much for coming. And please, let's continue this conversation going in the comment section. Next week, we are going to read
3 and 4.
chapters 3 and 4. We're just going to move 2 chapters at a time because these chapters are longer than the last book. Rahul says, amazing start to the book. I'm enjoying the read. Yay! Good. It is a good book. Tell your friends and family about this book if you feel compelled to do so, or they can just get a quick, semi-quick, because it's an hour long, but semi-quick analysis of each chapters. But yeah, so anyways, thank you so much for coming to the Beckisphere, and I will see you guys on Monday when we talk about HFCs, which are hydrofluorocarbons. Oh, hi Raquel. Thank you for coming. Now I know where one of the points are. Yeah, so on Monday, we're going to talk about hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. And I will explain what it's used for currently and what we're doing about it to get rid of it on Monday. So look for that video. And as always, remember to talk about the climate every day to everyone. Be obnoxious about it, but in a respectful way. And to support your local news organizations. And yeah, I will see you all later. Bye. And